welcome to Pharicode on Air. I'm Colleen Kelly, the marketing assistant at Pharicode, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. The benefits of cloud hosting and converting to an IL5-compliant ServiceNow and Microsoft Azure CSP environment. Before we get started, we'd like to give you some background info on Pharicode. Pharicode is an elite ServiceNow partner that provides cutting-edge technology services, managed services, and staff augmentation to federal, state, and local government organizations. We're proud to have over 270 certifications, nearly 70,000 hours of services performed, and partnerships with Microsoft, ServiceNow, Google, and more. As a perk of attending today, we'll be giving away a $50 Visa gift card. We'll announce the winner at the end of the session, so be sure to stay on for the whole webinar. I'm excited to hand things over to our presenters, Josh Black, Director of Cloud Services, and Justin Keith, Cloud Engineer Lead at Pharicode. We'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout today's session, so be sure to send in any questions as they arise, and we'll do our best to answer them. Josh and Justin, you can take it from here.
Thanks, Colleen. I appreciate the introduction and the marketing team for putting this together for us. I'd like to introduce myself, Josh Black, Director of Cloud Services. I've been supporting enterprise IT for DoD for a little over 11 years, and we have seen the transition from physical hardware in an enterprise environment to a virtualized environment, now into this new realm of computing in the cloud. So we've got some history, within the team, and one of those that leads our engineering team is Justin Keith. If you'd like to do a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thank you. So I'm Justin Keith. I'm the lead cloud engineer here at Pharicode. My day-to-day basically is to oversee and manage operations within the engineering team, from one side of the IT spectrum to the other, such as network, virtual machines, things like that. And just like Josh, I've spent several years in DoD. And things are definitely transitioning to the cloud, as Josh says. This is something we've all seen, and it's growing exponentially quick.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate that. So today's presentation, we're going to try to focus on specifically some cloud benefits that Pharicode can help your organizations to achieve. Some of those specific details of those benefits, and then we'll kind of go into what ServiceNow Hosting in the cloud environment that's rated at an impact level 5 will buy you and your organization. And then we'll talk about just overall architecture of migration of applications to the cloud. So we'll start off and talk about the cloud defined. So it's a buzzword that goes around the industry, just like every other buzzword that's happened in the past, and there's a lot of misinterpretations of what cloud is. So one of the best definitions I think I've heard anybody say is it's someone else's computer, and there's some humor in that because it is a halfway joke, but there is a lot of truth to that when you're talking about specifically public clouds. There are several different types of cloud environments. We have private clouds, which are generally on-premise clouds that are controlled and owned by organizations. And then we have kind of a hybrid model where organizations can take advantage of private cloud and public cloud. And then, of course, the third being public cloud, which is what you'll see for commercial and government clouds. And that is where we're going to be focusing a lot of our attention on today is the public cloud, specifically a government commercial cloud, and where we have found the best benefit for our customers in securing their workloads and providing all those benefits of cloud environments. So we'll get right into it. We're going to cover three main areas when we're defining cloud. We're going to talk about the drivers and benefits of migrating to the cloud, some of the models that you'll see for consuming cloud services, and then kind of outline some of the capabilities of those services that you can get from the cloud. So we'll start here with one of the primary drivers that we have seen to modernize and decentralize government workloads. That's what we've seen as the primary push. But a secondary underlying driver a lot of time is cost. There's the idea that organizations have to continually maintain an operating cost by having all of this equipment that's depreciating, and they're still having to keep track of it. And one of those things they would like to do is take those capital expenditures of equipment that's aging and constantly needs maintenance contracts and having to continue property management and all that, taking all of that and kind of converting those costs over to more of a operations cost, where you are simply paying a bill each month for services to consume those cloud workloads, where you're getting your enterprise services or maybe just hosting applications, whatever your need is. But it's a a more steady monthly bill that you're paying, and not having to worry about some of those things like property and maintenance contracts and all that. So, I've kind of listed a couple of things over here on the right where we talk about hardware acquisition and maintenance contracts are no longer needed when you are consuming public cloud. That can add to your timeline significantly when you're having to go through the procurement process to get hardware. And then, when it's time for that maintenance contract to come up for renewal, it's another extension of trying to get through procurement your renewal. We've any of those that have been in DoD contracting before, and you're having to go through this procurement cycle, it can be extended. It can run into all kinds of roadblocks. So trying to remove some of those is a major benefit. A secondary benefit and driver is the administrative burden of managing a physical infrastructure that's on premise. You do have to have certain skill levels of employees to manage all aspects of an enterprise environment when you're supporting DoD. So having some of those infrastructure management kind of transitioned over to a cloud service provider like Pharicode, you're able to reduce that administrative burden, reduce the overhead cost of having personnel that are trained in specific disciplines to manage that infrastructure. A third thing would be security compliant infrastructure or architecture. So for Pharicode's cloud environment that we have stood up, we are already compliant with NIST standards and have gone through all of the works to implement all the DISA-STIGs in all of our virtual machines that we've deployed. We have all of your monitoring already capable. You can consume that as a service right out of the gate. So your workloads can come into the cloud and be secure without having to do a lot of architectural or design planning for that. The fourth thing here we've got is consistent environment across multiple regions with a single management portal. So if you have come from an enterprise architecture environment of on-premise data centers, you know that most of your supporting infrastructure, your storage, your compute, whether that is a Nutanix style where it is a converged infrastructure where you can manage your virtual machines and network and storage all together. You have a management portal for that. If you're in a separate environment where you have your compute on some rack of servers, and then you have your storage environment on another array, you have multiple management portals to access all of that. When you go to a cloud environment, you have that one single pane of glass that you're able to access and perform your management of. And depending on what level of cloud services that you're consuming, you can leave the management of the actual infrastructure to your cloud service provider like Pharicode. If you're consuming software as a service, and we'll get to that in a minute on what kind of consumption and service models there are, but just know that there are immediate benefits of being able to manage and access all of your infrastructure from one single pane of glass when you go to a government cloud or commercial cloud provider. And the last thing that we'll cover here specifically is the ability to meet the demand, growing or shrinking demand of your application, of your enterprise environment, by utilizing a lot of the cloud services that are built for this. They are easily scalable. If their application is cloud aware, you can support growing on a demand. If you have, when it comes to fiscal year end, let's say, and that your acquisition workforce is going to be putting an incredible demand at the end of fiscal year, and then it's going to taper off around the October-November timeframe. Well, your cloud environment, your applications can grow with that demand to meet that demand that you have for that short time frame. It's burstable. That's a phrase people like to use. You can support it in bursts, and then roll that back to maintain your cost margins, to keep your cost as low as possible while maintaining the demand of your systems in the cloud. So we'll go on to the next topic, which is cloud service models. There are three cloud service models that you'll run across. One is infrastructure as a service, commonly referred to as IaaS. This is where your deployment and administration of your virtual machines or resources are deployed, and you have access to that as a customer to, let's say you have an application that you require operating system access in order to configure or manage. You would be utilizing an infrastructure as a service request, so that your cloud service provider would provide the back end, let's say, so your actual images that you would be using, your network backbone that you would be using, your connectivity, your cloud service account access, your cloud service provider would enable that for you, and your administrators for the organization could access those virtual machines and do their administration or their application administration as they need to. The second one is a platform as a service, or PaaS, and this takes it just one level higher. So this is where your cloud service provider is also going to be managing your operating system. And what they will provide to you is a platform for you to install your application and manage your application. And a lot of times this is a kind of a mixed ground where you may have your cloud service provider actually do the installation of the application for you, and you just come in and manage it from the application portal. So this is kind of the in-between of infrastructure and software as a service. And software as a service is the third option. This is where, your cloud service provider has basically done all of the legwork to give you the infrastructure, the secure infrastructure, the application server infrastructure already completed, application installed, and they provide you simply access to the organization for administration and consumption of the service. So, in our presentation a little bit later, we'll talk about ServiceNow specifically. And this is, a prime example of providing an application for an organization to just come in and consume it, access the portal, create their user accounts, administrator accounts, create their integrations with the application. All of that is made available because your CSP is kind of managing everything from that application layer backwards, so down the stack, all the way down to the physical infrastructure. We'll move on to the cloud capabilities now. Now that we've talked about, what are some of the benefits and what are some of the models that you can put in place for cloud consumption. Let's talk about some of the capabilities that you get when you are starting your migration to the cloud. So what we've seen in the government cloud specifically is that a lot of different services are available from a commercial cloud. But when you start implementing government security standards, you have a lot less options, or you have historically, for a cloud environment. And one of the things that Microsoft Azure and their IL5 and IL4 environments have provided recently is an expanded capability of Azure services that are available to the government cloud. So a lot of those things that we can provide to you as a hosting provider, if you're interested in coming on board with your ServiceNow application or any other application or workload, is we can provide you with some authentication. And that is, that can be using Azure Active Directory to enforce your role-based access controls, RBAC, or you can integrate with your applications with on-prem identities providers. So, if you, for example, with ServiceNow, if you want to integrate into your local Active Directory that you have on premise, then you can deploy a mid server in your environment down at your base or wherever you have your actual data center, to allow it to integrate or pull from your Active Directory, or to do discovery of all of your assets in the environment, in the enterprise environment, and have that report up to your ServiceNow application. So we have that capability to integrate there. And another one that obviously is very pressing when you're talking about security standards is CAC authentication. So Pharicode has a managed security stack, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And one of those components of the managed security stack is the ability to authenticate with smart card. And we can do that a myriad of ways, but we have that capability to guide you through that and implement that for your applications. Another capability is data management. So we have flexible data retention and backup policies, and we can, implement those according to your requirements. Whatever you have, if you have an extended retention period that you need to maintain your data, we can support that. If you don't have that requirement and you need to you lower your cost of data retention by keeping a few copies of your data and being fine with that, then we can support that as well. So it's completely flexible. We can also implement third-party data management services. So if there's one that your organization has a partnership with, or they have a requirement that's been dictated that you will use, this certain application, we can support third-party implementations for data management if it is cloud aware. Another one of the capabilities is monitoring. So our managed security stack, we have applications that secure your audit requirements. We have your performance monitoring requirements checked off. All of those capabilities can come from a multitude of options. We have Azure native capability where we can monitor your resources for performance. And then we use a third-party application, Splunk, to do your audit records. So we have all of those security requirements already covered in our managed security stack. So we've touched on this before. You literally bring your workloads to Azure, and you don't have to worry about a lot of the base infrastructure and the things that you have to do in an enterprise environment. We already have a lot of those capabilities built in, and you'll come on board and be able to hit the ground running with those. Automation is another one. Specifically, when we talk about ServiceNow hosting, we have the capability to deploy multiple instances of ServiceNow in a short time frame, so that we can support whatever the requirement is for you and your organization. If you need additional instances stood up for a test or for a demo or whatever the capability might be, we can do that in a short time frame for you, because due to the ability to utilize Microsoft Azure APIs to do that automation. The last one I want to touch on for capabilities is disaster recovery and COOP. Anyone that's been in a DoD organization, very familiar with those two terms. And we have that capability to support through a myriad of ways. I mean, once again, this is cloud environments can be flexible because you have multiple ways that you can satisfy your requirements. One of those ways that we do that is through Azure redundancy. So multiple Azure regions with multiple racks within a region, you can provide that redundancy either on a local data center level or a regional data center level, where you have that data spread across multiple regions to prevent any data loss during some sort of event. We have that capability where you can replicate that completely across region, and we have it as simple as if you want to replicate your database within the same region, so that you have the capability to recover on a near real-time basis. We have some customers that are utilizing that service as well. So we can support, whatever your requirement is for your recovery point objectives or your recovery time objectives. We can support those based off of the infrastructure that we have in place or can put in place to meet the requirement. I'll move on to the next slide, which is going to center around the government cloud specifically. So we've touched on the different cloud offerings, but we want to kind of talk about specifically what makes government cloud different from commercial cloud. And we can kind of break those down into two categories: infrastructure and authorization and security. So for the infrastructure piece, I kind of want to bring Justin in here to kind of give us a brief overview of some of the differences in the infrastructure between a commercial cloud and a government cloud offerings as it relates to Microsoft Azure. Justin?
Thanks, Josh. So when it comes to physical separation, in order to truly understand this appropriately, let's take a step back for a second. And I'm going to use Microsoft Azure Government as my example here, but currently Azure has 58 what they call regions, which is just another term for data center, essentially worldwide, making their services available to 140 countries and regions all over the globe. Currently, Azure Government provides Impact Level 4 services in 4 regions: US Gov Virginia, US Gov Iowa, US Gov Arizona, and US Gov Texas, as well as Impact Level 5 services, which are offered in 2 undisclosed locations: US DoD East and DoD Central. So Azure Government uses the same underlying technology as Azure Global or Azure Commercial, however you want to refer to it, providing all of the cloud service models that Josh touched on earlier: your IaaS, your PaaS, your SaaS, The key difference here is that Azure Government uses physically isolated data centers and networks located in the US only. So that is the key. Azure Government components and services, they handle data that's subject to certain government regulations and requirements, such as FedRAMP, NIST, DoD Impact Level 4 or 5. So deploying and hosting applications in the Azure Gov Cloud ensures that all your service components, such as your virtual machines, disks, your storage arrays, databases, what have you, and all other Azure services are all operating on an isolated air-gapped infrastructure. So another key difference between Azure Gov and Azure Global is that Azure Gov customers are subject to validation of eligibility. So what does this mean? Well, anybody can just go out and create an account in Azure Commercial and access pay-as-you-go or enterprise agreements, and can just start deploying resources right out of the gate. In order to do that in Azure Government, obviously you have to go through an approval process and the necessary vetting and all those, the paperwork, if you will. So one advantage to Pharikode's cloud team is that, as a service provider, our team has already undergone all the necessary vetting, and we've obtained the authorization to deploy and manage services in all of the Azure Government regions, which significantly minimizes your startup time. So if you come to us and say, I need to get this application up and running, you're not looking at days, weeks, months, you're looking at hours potentially, because we've already gone through that process ahead of time. So the second item here on the slide, DISN connectivity. So the DISN actually stands for the Defense Information Systems Network. And using the Department of Defense as an example, many mission critical systems and services must adhere to a very strict, and when I say very, I should emphasize harder, very strict set of guidelines, one of which prohibits network traffic from traversing the commercial internet, as most of us do with our phones and our laptops. So one question might be, how can a DoD on-premise system integrate with a service that's hosted in Azure Government Cloud? Well, this can be achieved through the deployment of an Azure Express Route. So what is an Express Route? It's nothing more than basically a dedicated circuit, creating a private connection from the Azure Gov Cloud back to the DISN or any of the various DoD networks. This circuit routes traffic bidirectionally from Azure directly to the DISN or any of those other DoD networks, and it never touches the commercial internet. Other than the obvious advantage here, an express route offers more reliability, faster speed, lower latency than your typical internet connection. Through the use of this dedicated circuit, systems which reside in Azure Gov effectively become an extension to the DoD wide area network. So essentially, you're replicating a DoD environment that connects right to the main DoD environment. Customers utilizing this service can obtain dedicated IP address space assigned and provided by DISA, who's the Defense Information Systems Agency. So you will actually have registered space dedicated just to your services and applications. One thing to note too, our Pharicode Cloud team has successfully implemented multiple express route circuits, which are currently providing several mission critical systems and services to literally hundreds of thousands of DoD and federal users. So last point I want to touch on here is the data at rest encryption. So many organizations and agencies today require that your cloud service providers adhere to that strict set of guidelines I mentioned a few minutes ago with regard to data governance and compliance. Industry and government regulations such as HIPAA, PCI, FedRAMP, all of these lay out specific safeguards regarding data protection and encryption requirements. Encryption at rest is a mandatory measure that's typically required for compliance to adhere to those regulations. Encryption at rest is designed to prevent essentially unauthorized users from accessing the data by ensuring the data is encrypted when it sits on a disk. So if an attacker was to obtain a hard drive, let's say, with encrypted data, but they don't have the encryption keys, the attacker must defeat the encryption, for lack of a better word, to read that data. By default, Azure provides native data at rest encryption for all Azure Gov resources. So your virtual machines, your storage arrays, your blob storage, Active Directory, everything is all encrypted by default. And it's something that actually cannot be turned off so that you're compliant right out of the gate the day you start. One thing to point out too is that when you do this, there's two methods to encrypting. So you can either let Microsoft directly, natively manage those encryption keys for you, or they offer the ability for the customer or the cloud service provider to manage their own encryption keys with a service kind of like called Azure Key Vault, essentially. I do want to point out, because I'm sure somebody's going to ask this question, well, if Microsoft manages my keys, that means they have access to my data. No, that's actually not true. What I mean by they manage it natively is their automation capability actually encrypts everything, and they allow you through the Azure Government console in the portal to be able to utilize those encryption keys to be able to do your work. So the easiest way to explain this is Microsoft's not just going to sit there and say, I've got access to all of your government data, because they actually don't. It's all encrypted by default. So just wanted to point that out, because I'm sure somebody's going to ask. Josh, back to you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. So now that we've covered some of the infrastructure differences between government and commercial cloud, let's talk about the authorization and security aspects. So when you migrate your workloads into a government cloud, you can rest assured that the service offerings that you're going to be consuming, they've already been vetted with DISA to meet all the security standards that you would have from your on-premise environment. That you would have to meet those same security standards. The difference is a lot of the service offerings in the cloud have already been vetted. This includes some Azure provisional authority at impact level 4, 5, 6, and the FedRAMP authorization up to FedRAMP High. Those are already meeting those standards right out of the box. So a lot of the built-in capabilities of the cloud, where you have your redundancy of services through the different regions or within the same region, all of those capabilities are already meeting security standards and don't have to be reviewed. They've already been vetted from your standard DISA requirements which you would have in any workload, production workload. The next one is authorization and accreditation. So one of the things that you can rest assured of is that your workloads are going to be able to inherit some of that accreditation that's been completed on the cloud service provider by Azure. You can inherit a lot of those physical controls that you would have to manage. There's other aspects of the RMF control families that you can inherit as soon as you walk in the door with your workload. So what that does is it reduces the accreditation effort on the organization and their IA team because they're able to minimize the controls that they have to answer. And the third thing regarding accreditation for the authorization and security is not necessarily from a government cloud provider, but more Pharicode as your CSP, is we can help you with your accreditation. As Justin said, we have multiple customers that are hosting their DoD workloads, and we have gone through that process with them and guided them along their accreditation journey to achieve their ATO from their environment that they have hosted with us. So we have the expertise on our team to help you through that every step of the way. We can provide, as little or as much assistance as you would like. We do know that, every organization is different, and we're there to support at whatever capacity you would like us to. So we'll move on to the next main topic that we wanted to touch on, and that's specifically ServiceNow hosting in Impact Level 5 with Microsoft Azure. As a ServiceNow Elite Partner, Pharicode has a huge team that can help you with both cloud services and your ServiceNow implementation. So we have a few benefits that you'll get by hosting your ServiceNow application with us. So we'll touch on a few of those. I've got them listed here on the screen, but the first one is the managed security stack, which we've touched on a little bit previously. All of those capabilities that we have to meet your security standards, your operation standards, all of those are kind of included in that managed security stack. So we'll have Justin touch on that in just a second. Resilient infrastructure, we'll touch on that. The secure baseline implementation, we've touched on the ability to automate deployment of your instances and servers that are required to support those instances. And those are already done with a secure baseline. So, those are already secured with DISA STIG standards. We'll also touch on how we maximize your flexibility and control of top to bottom from your application layer all the way down to the physical layer. And then we'll talk about, what does it look like to deploy multiple environments for you for ServiceNow instances. And then the last thing we'll touch on for the ServiceNow and IL5 is this topic of DISN integration that Justin has touched on already. So Justin, if you want to give a brief overview of our managed security stack.
Sure, absolutely. So as Josh was saying, as an enterprise cloud service provider, Pharicode does offer a fully managed service and security stack, or MSS as we call it. This stack includes various components such as configuration management, automation, resource monitoring, alert services, security audit capabilities, authorization boundary firewalls, and a very robust access control system. Authentication services, as Josh touched on earlier, which include, your DoD Common Access Card, CAC, SAML, single sign-on. We have various DoD industry standard services such as the host-based security system, HBSS, Assured Compliance Assessment Solution, also known as ACAS. As we deploy images, everything that we have, it has already gone through the process of DoD compliance. They're all secure, hardened images, such as RHEL Enterprise Linux, Windows Server 2019, what have you, Active Directory, insert buzzword here. We also offer application proxies, reverse proxy services, all your other networking services such as, SMTP for mail, DNS services, SSL, X509 for application, TLS. This is not an exhaustive list per se, but high-level overview. This is kind of what it looks like to see that stack. It's an enterprise IT offering from one side to the other.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate that. It was a good description of our MSS. Specifically around ServiceNow hosting and the architecture for how we deploy those instances for our customers is we implement a resilient infrastructure. So multiple application nodes, redundant database capabilities. We have a lot of those built into our deployment models so that you can maintain your operations with little to no downtime, or if you have a resource malfunction, you have that HA style capability to maintain operations. Secure baselines. So as we've touched on a few times, we already have those images prepared for you to meet STIG standards, and they are deployed with our automation techniques. So we'll move on to the next one, which is flexibility and control. And as you can imagine, as we've gone through some of these descriptions of the service offerings that we have complete control of all of this infrastructure. So we can be flexible to whatever your workload is and what it requires and adjust on the fly. We have that capability, which is huge. This is more capability than a software as a service. You have that flexibility for modifications to be made as needed to support however you may bring your workloads to us, or what you end up modifying and growing into. We have the capability to grow with you on that. The next one is multi-environment deployment. So with a click of a button, we can deploy a development, a staging, and a production environment for ServiceNow. If you have the requirement down the road to deploy another environment, well, that's also just another click of the button. Easily deployed with our STIG'd image, immediately meeting the requirements for securing that baseline. And then the last thing is the DISN, which is the connection that you'll have to connect your workloads directly to Nipper. So we can work you through that process. We have done this, as Justin has stated, multiple times with our different customers, and we have that kind of guide, to maybe hold your hand and bring you through that process of everything that needs to be accomplished. It is a partnership. As you can imagine, when you have a government customer that wants to bring a workload to the government cloud, there has to be some kind of a government-to-government communication regarding this connectivity through Nipper. So we're there to advise you, to guide you through that, and provide everything that you need to equip your IA staff or whoever is designated to be that point man to have everything they need to go and request this connection, manage the connection. Everything is kind of set up for your success. So the last thing, the last major topic we want to touch on is application migration to the cloud that is not ServiceNow. So this would be maybe your custom enterprise application that you've been told you need to either modernize or move to the cloud. So we've covered these two areas here that we'll kind of discuss in briefly what that means. What is a lift and shift effort? and then how ServiceNow can help you with your modernization, maybe to move your application workload into ServiceNow to meet that requirement from that might have been dictated to you. So a lift and shift. So often what we've seen is a mandate has been given to an organization to move a workload to the cloud, and it generally comes with a tight timeline. When tight timelines mean you have less time to plan, you have less time to procure funding, you have less time to do any, resiliency testing and that kind of thing. So a lift and shift effort, meaning you literally do a one-to-one copy of your application and bring that from your on-premise environment, deploy it into the cloud. It's a quick migration. It immediately gets your application to the cloud, which is, it checks the box that you have to migrate your application, but it does set you up for immediate success, because now that you're in the environment, we can begin the process after the fact to maybe modernize the application at that point, or maybe streamline it, or make it more efficient using cloud services. We have that capability once your workload is already put into the cloud. And once again, the lift and shift allows you to move that application to a secure platform. So your operating systems that you're moving your applications to, they're already meeting DISA STIG standards. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about during that process. And the next one we want to touch on is modernization, which is where Pharicode and our staff of implementation experts can help you in determining what are your requirements for your application. Is it something that we can, integrate with ServiceNow and move it into ServiceNow to provide your organization with an up-to-date, modernized application? We have the ability to do implementation assistance from top to bottom. So architecture, project management, the actual, button clickers. We have the ability to go in and do that to implement your modernization for your application. And of course, the long-term benefits of having your application there is you're on a current and modernized architecture that will be supported for the near future. You have all of your application components are in an environment that will continue to be supported and grown as it continues in its life cycle. You'll have reducing your user portals down to one ServiceNow user portal for accessing the application. You're consolidating your infrastructure. So maybe you have 3 or 4 applications that are running on 4 servers in your environment on-prem, and you can bring that all in and consolidate those applications to one server within the cloud. That's your ServiceNow application server. So you'll obtain cost benefit savings, administration savings. All of that is a part of your modernization effort. I think that is the last thing that we wanted to cover. I did want to open the floor up for any questions that you might have regarding either Pharikode's services that we provide, any other additional details regarding cloud that you might want some more information on. Be glad to open up the floor for that.
All right, everyone. Thanks, Josh and Justin, for that presentation. So we do have a few questions in here that we'd like to answer. And the first question we have for you is, what kind of assistance can Pharicode provide for accreditation?
Sure. We were going to have our IA lead, Don Bradford, join the call. I see he is available. Don, would you be able to field that question, please, sir?
Yeah, I sure can. Sorry I'm late. I'm tied up in meetings. So for accreditation, we can help any organization, and we can help develop and support the following artifacts: your SOPs for all the control families within RMF. We can walk you through the system categorization to determine whether you're low, moderate, or high. We can also help you with the selection of all the security controls that you will have to implement within your system. If any plan of action and milestones need to be done, we can help you with the POM, get it all set up. And we can also help you produce any of the required reports within EMAS so you can submit your workflow to get your ATO or assess only authorization.
And here's another question. We have, what approval is required for DISA BCAP?
Sure, I can field that one. So there's multiple I guess you could say, hurdles that you have to cross when you want to integrate a DISA BCAP into your environment. Some of those are obviously directly government to government workflows that you have to complete. One of those is the Cloud Information Technology Project, or CITP registration, where you're going to register your application or your workload as a cloud project. The next thing is a DISA SNAP process registration, and that's the systems network and integration approval process. That will require a couple of things to be put in place for your workload. There's a couple of dependencies that have to be met. A couple of those would be you have to have either a interim approval to test, so IATT, or an ATO for your application if that already exists. You'll have to have one of those. And then you'll also have to have a memorandum of agreement, MOA, with a CSSP, so a cloud services security provider. You'll have to have those two things in order to submit your SNAP registration, and that is from a government entity that does that request. And we can provide all of the documentations that are needed to go through and submit those. And then the last thing is a CPTC, or a cloud permission to connect. So that's the last hurdle there. After that's all been completed, there's actually some back-end infrastructure pieces where they have to order the circuit that is provided that Justin touched on earlier. It's a physical circuit connection. They have to order that. Once that's approved, there's some coordination between Pharicode as your cloud service provider and DISA to get those talking back and forth. And at that point, you are connected to Nipper, so you can begin communicating with on-premise infrastructure with your application in ServiceNow.
Hey, Josh, just to add one comment to that, once a DISA BCAP, has actually been fully implemented, I did just want to point out that, once that connection's there and you're able to reach back into the Nipper or the DISN of some type, doesn't mean that just everything's open, right? You're not just going to be able to start, running port queries and everything else. I mean, you still have to go through the necessary approval process by DISA to have certain ports, protocols, things like that open. So I did just want to put that out. It's not one of the situations where BCAP is successful and boom, all of a sudden I have access to everything. It doesn't work like that. So I just wanted to add that.
Exactly. Thank you, Justin, for that clarity. So the process to get that open would be submitting a ports, protocols, and services document to the DISA SECA team, and they would work you through that process of opening those ports to either specific IPs or ranges, however you've requested that at a government level. They will put through those requests, open those up, so you can establish those. I do believe there are some default port openings through a DISA BCAP, but those can change, so we won't go into specifics here. But for the most part, yes, your PPSM registration will be how you go about opening those ports and protocols.
Great. Thanks, Josh and Justin, for that answer. Looks like we have one more question from the audience. Can my cloud application interface with my organization's on-site data center?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll take that one. So absolutely. I mean, there's several methods to achieving this. Pharicode has worked with several customers in the past to do such a thing. Whether you use that Azure Express route that we talked about earlier, that's the that direct dedicated circuit that ties back into Nipper. You also have the ability to stand up a IPsec tunnel. So we could deploy the necessary infrastructure in Azure, create the IPsec tunnel that goes back to your on-prem data center. That way, all that traffic crossing, the wire has been encrypted and it's secure. There's also abilities with VPN service, and it all doesn't have to necessarily be specifically through some type of tunnel, right? I think Josh actually mentioned earlier. So let's say you have ServiceNow running in the Pharicode cloud itself in Azure, but yet you've got resources that sit on-prem. If you deploy that mid server to your data center on-prem, it can communicate back to ServiceNow via 443 HTTPS, and that traffic can traverse that way too. So it can go over the commercial internet, still encrypted, still secure, but there are multiple ways to achieving that. So the short answer should have been yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Justin. Sounds great. Looks like that's all the questions we have for today. So we'd like to move on to announce the winner of our $50 Visa gift card. And the winner today is Joyce Amitis. Congratulations, Joyce, and we'll email you your prize directly. Thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you, Josh and Justin, for presenting, and Dawn for those answers. We hope everyone enjoyed. If you have any more questions, feel free to tweet them to us or reach out at info@pharicode.com. To see more sessions, please visit our website. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.